Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the traditional territories of the Mississauga and the Haudenosaunee nations. It is on this territory that tonight we hope to inspire new ways of thinking about issues that affect our future. Here in Hamilton, and indeed across the entire country and around the world, there is increasing discussion on aging and the challenges and the opportunities that come with a growing population of older adults worldwide. At McMaster, we know that by working together, we have the ability to significantly impact the lives of today's seniors. And that's why we've created and continue to invest in the McMaster Institute for Research on Aging, which fosters interdisciplinary research and knowledge sharing. And we've recently joined the network of age-friendly universities, allowing us to work more closely with like-minded global institutions that also recognize the study of aging as a key strategic priority. Our researchers, and in turn, society at large, benefit from the visionary contributions of donors like our Chancellor, Suzanne Labarge, who I am so pleased to see here tonight, and whose investments have brought important issues such as mobility in aging to the fore. The causes and consequences of reduced mobility have significant health and societal impacts, including social isolation and loss of resilience. And Chancellor Labarge has enabled McMaster to focus on this important topic by supporting the development of the Labarge Center for Mobility in Aging. Tonight, we will hear from community leaders who bring diverse perspectives on the meaning and experience of mobility. This is, of course, just the start of our dialogue, and we're looking forward to continued conversations in the coming months and years through research, education, and partnerships within Hamilton and beyond. We also continue to share the best available research evidence to support aging people, their caregivers, clinicians, and policymakers throughout the development of important tools such as the McMaster Optimal Aging Portal, which offers free, trustworthy information. And here I want to emphasize trustworthy. There's a lot of stuff on aging on the web that you don't want to look at or trust, right? You can trust us. McMaster sees Canada's changing demographics as a national strength and as a significant opportunity to develop and expand the McMaster's research portfolio in aging for the benefit of Canadians and people around the world. So, to get our conversation started, please join me in welcoming the Executive Director of the Walrus and publisher of the Walrus magazine, Shelley Ambrose.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you, McMaster University, for making this event possible tonight. I am indeed Shelley Ambrose, Executive Director of the Walrus Foundation and publisher of the Walrus magazine. We're thrilled to be back in this gorgeous building for McMaster University Institute for Research on Aging presents the Walrus Talks Mobility. Yes, that is our title tonight. It is very long. As you know, this is the traditional territory of the Mississauga and the Haudenosaunee nations. There's a very rich history here in Hamilton. When I arrived today and came upstairs, there was an artist actually committing art at the top of the stairs, live in front of everybody, that beautiful bridge that you have, the high-level bridge, where I understand Margaret Atwood filmed The Handmaid's Tale under that bridge. Did you all watch that? Did you see your bridge? Anyway, that was the bridge. And there's a guy painting it right there. There's a very rich history here and a very bright future as well. The Walrus is all about the future. We are an optimistic project. We were started 15 years ago, almost. Next year is our 15th anniversary, and our goal is to create forums for conversations on matters vital to Canadians. One way we do that is by publishing the Walrus magazine. Hands up if you know about the Walrus magazine. There is one on your chair. Every hand should be up now. We gave you a free one. Everybody, that is great. Hands up if you subscribe to the Walrus magazine. You are my besties. Thank you for subscribing. The rest of you, I'll talk to you about that a little later. Tonight is our 81st Walrus Talks across the country. Hands up if you've ever been to a Walrus Talks before. I've been to 81. Hands up if you're newbies. Welcome to the newbies. Yay. Thank you for coming out. So many new people to us. So yes, we have the Walrus magazine, and yes, we have the Walrus Talks, and of course we have a website, thewalrus.ca, but what the Walrus really is a place for you to come together to read, talk, listen, and share ideas for the future of our country and the world. In all things Walrus, you will find well-told stories on everything from politics to culture, environment, technology, so much more. We're meant to spark a conversation, one we have with you and one that you have with your community. If you are, now that you're here, you are all what we call Walry. And we know that that's not a word, because we're good with words. You are all Walry, we choose that word, and you have a few things in common with the people around you. The Walrus community has a tendency to actually think about stuff and has a tendency to subscribe to the notion that one's mind is like a parachute. It works nominally better when open. So, welcome. You are the Walrus. The Walrus is not left-wing, right-wing. As you know, a walrus has no wings. We are an independent entity with no owners and no one point of view. We have an educational mandate. That doesn't mean boring. We are governed by a board of directors, a National Advisory Council, and an education review committee. I never thought I had to say this out loud before this last year, but our journalism is fact-based. We have fact checkers, they are live humans, and we also have a unique editorial fellowship designed to ensure the future of journalism, not just at the Walrus, but elsewhere, is bright. Our journalism and our training programs are supported by circulation, advertising, sponsorship, charitable donations, and partnerships. There's absolutely no way we could do the work that we do without partners like the McMaster Institute for the Research on Aging. Our topic tonight is mobility, and of course, mobility issues do not just affect the aging or the aged, it affects everybody. Those of you who are not aging or, well, you're all aging, sorry, are not aged yet, may be caring for somebody who is, or looking at your own future. Somebody that thinks an awful lot about this future is Ontario's Minister for Senior Affairs, who is with us tonight. Please welcome the Honourable Deepika Damerla.
Thank you, Shelley. Good evening, everyone. Shelley, you'll be delighted to know that while I don't subscribe to the Walrus, I do read it regularly because the Legislative Library in Ontario subscribes to the Walrus, so there's a lot of us who do read it. And I'm really delighted to join in welcoming you to tonight's Walrus Talks, Mobility, and to be a part of an important discussion on maintaining mobility as we age. I'd also like to recognize the valued work of the McMaster Institute on Research in Aging, who are co-sponsors of this event. And I just want to say to McMaster, what a beautiful building. You know, I know that today's topic is about maintaining mobility as we age, but I want to, just for a minute, talk more broadly about the very important discussion we need to have as to what it means to be living in a country, in a province, and in our cities where seniors over the age of 65 outnumber children under the age of 15. And I'd like to begin by reframing this a little bit. And the reason I say that is that, you know, when you read a lot of the media discourse on this, the one phrase that keeps, I guess, jumping out is the silver tsunami, or the gray tsunami, or the tsunami of aging. And I sort of take objection to that. Because the fact of the matter is, the reason we have more people over the age of 65 than children under the age of 15, one of the reasons is we're living longer. In fact, I was startled to read today that between 2005 5 in 2017, which is about a decade, life expectancy across the world, not Canada, increased by 5 years. I mean, when I just read that, I was, wow, in a decade, everybody on this planet is living 5 years longer. Of course, the stories are slightly different in different parts of the world. But it just gives us an idea of the fact that we're living longer, which is the gift of longevity, which is something we as human beings have strived for so long, and it's now here. So to me, the question should be rephrased as, now that we have the gift of life, now that we are living on average 20 years longer than about 80 years ago, what do we do with those extra 20 years? And to me, that's the way I want to see it, because it really is a good news story. And I know that I'm sort of preaching to the converted here, because I had some conversations with some of you, and I've also just heard some of you speak. So in that context, what is the role of government? What is the role of government in the context of we're living longer, we're living healthier, and now what do we do with this extra time? How do we make the best use of this? And that's why I'm here. And I did notice that as the politician, I only get 3 minutes, while I noticed all of the speakers got about 8 minutes each, which is appropriate, because I think as a politician, our job is to listen so that we can make good policy. So I'm truly curious today to learn more and to hear from the experts as to what their solutions are. A few things that I want to talk about that the Ontario government is doing to try and make the most of this gift of life. One of the things that I did was I toured the province. In fact, I've toured it now twice, speaking to seniors. And here's what they've been telling us. We're living longer, we're living better. But the thing that they're telling us is stop seeing us simply through the lens of healthcare. That is what I'm hearing. And this was borne out to me over and over again. And in fact, it's the baby boomers. They're truly, truly redefining what it means to grow older, as they've redefined much of so much. And one of the things that they're militating against is the idea of retirement. What they're saying is, this is my second act, this is my third act, this is my chance to do all of the things that I couldn't do when I was raising a family or paying off that mortgage. It's not about retirement, it's about what's the next adventure. And so what is government's role in enabling our seniors? And then the other thing that they're militating against is the idea that as you grow older, that somehow you are perhaps that your ability to contribute to society is perhaps compromised. And this comes out in very interesting ways. I'm going to tell you a story that I really, really like. We have across the province something we call the elderly person centers. We have 260 of them. And so about 2 years ago, as a province, we decided to take stock and see how are these centers performing. And there's actually legislation that governs it that hasn't been touched in 30 years. So we said, let's look at the legislation, let's look at the centers. So we sort of did some roundtables with seniors. And what do you think is the number one thing seniors told us? They said, we hate the name. We hate the name Elderly Person Center. And therein lies a story, because words matter. Words truly matter. So now we are government, so I can't say we came up with a truly innovative or fun or exciting name, but I think we've done better, because this fall we're going to rename them the Seniors Active Living Centers. So it's a step in the right direction, but words matter. And I can tell you that I was at about 3 weeks ago, I was in St. John's, Newfoundland, for what we call federal, provincial, territorial talks for ministers with responsibility for seniors. And one of the things that kept coming up is the words we use: older, senior, elderly, people with more experience. You know, there was just so many words that we were trying to figure out what is the best way to define ourselves. And that's because words matter. In keeping with everything that we've heard from seniors, The other thing that they've told us is we want to live in our own homes for as long as we can. And so we have a policy across Ontario that many of you I know are familiar with, which we call aging in place. And that is the idea that you live in your own homes for as long as you can, and government does everything it can to help you do that. But the flip side, the risk of aging in place sometimes can be aging in isolation. So one of the things that my ministry is looking at is is there a role for government? Like, what can we do? Because that truly is a very important determinant of mental health, as to is there a role as we promote aging in place to ensure that it doesn't result in aging in isolation. The one program that I want to talk to this group in particular about, because I think some of you have all of these interesting ideas, is just last week, if you were paying attention on seniors issues, you would have seen that I announced a new stream of funding from the Ontario government. It's part of the Seniors Community Grant. And under this new stream, you can apply for up to $100,000 from the Ontario government if you have a project that is scalable. And what I mean by that is there are many groups across Ontario that are delivering absolutely fantastic, innovative programming, but it happens to be in that particular city or in that particular town. And they just don't have the resources to scale it up. So what we've created, I call it venture fund for not-for-profits with a good idea, who are to be increasing their market share. That's how I see this fund. So it's really open for anyone to apply up to $100,000. If you have a really good idea that's already operational, and you think it's so good that the rest of Ontario ought to have it, apply for this fund. It's already open, and I believe applications opened last week, and it's a rolling application process. So we call it the Seniors Community Grant, and you can find more information on our website. The other thing that I want to talk about, which is sort of more directly related to today's talk, is mobility, is our age-friendly community program. So the Ontario government had a grant called the Age-Friendly Community Grant that we gave out to 56 municipalities, and I know Hamilton was one of them. And in fact, Hamilton is a leader when it comes to age-friendly communities. And what this grant's really done is help municipalities take a hard look at what they need to do to make their communities more age-friendly. And finally, I just want to very quickly loop back to the Seniors Active Living Centers that I earlier referenced. And one of the things that we are going to do is expand them, because I've toured many of these, and apart from the name, as it turns out, older adults actually love this place. So we're going to expand about 40 of them over the next few months. In the coming months, the application process is open, so again, if Hamilton wants to apply, although I think you already have 12 of them, so. But still, you never know, so feel free to apply. But coming back to my original reframing, when people ask me, what is your role as the Minister of Seniors Affairs? I like to summarize it by saying, it's the job of the Ministry of Health to add years to our life, and it's my job to add life to those years. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Very adept at getting your 8 minutes anyway. So here is how the Walrus Talks works. You will see and hear 8 talkers in a row. They are here in the front row. They actually have 7 minutes each. They know this. They will come up and introduce themselves. We keep the lights up, so you all have a program that looks like this. It's in speaker order. Their bios are on the back. I do not pop up like a jack-in-the-box and read their bios to you. We know you can follow along. Please do. And just before I let them get started, I'd also like to recognize the Chancellor of McMaster University, very generous supporter of research into mobility, Suzanne Labarge. And welcome, Chancellor. We're very pleased that you're here with us tonight. Yes. And I would like to thank our talkers before they get underway. Thank you in advance to Scientific Director, McMaster Institute for Research on Aging and Labarge Center for Mobility and Aging, Parminder Rana, Vice President, Hamilton Council on Aging, and a Professor Emeritus here at MAC, Margaret Denton, Cree Elder, here from near Calgary, Alberta, Doreen Spence, Founding Chair, Mental Health Commission of Canada, the Honorable Michael Kirby, who prefers Mike when you meet him at the post-talks reception. McMaster's David Braley Chair in Family Medicine, Dee Mangan. Instructor, School of Journalism, Ryerson University, and a writer for the Walrus, Stephen Trumper. The Olympian and world-class kayaker, Adam here we go. I always used to think it was the city, then Den, Vancouver Den. That's how I think of him. Adam Vancouver Den, and futurist Sanjay Khanna. Thank you all for coming. Let us begin.
Good evening. It's great to see so many people here. As I was sitting there, all I could think of was 7 minutes, how I'm going to talk everything in 7 minutes, because many of the people who know me, they know I can't finish anything in 7 minutes. So here we go. I'm Parminder Rana. I'm the Scientific Director of McMaster Institute of Research on Aging. And I'm going to set the stage for many of the speakers who are going to be speaking after me. And it was alluded by the minister here that it is a triumph of modern medicine, public health, and social innovation that people are living this long. And if one looks from a historian's point of view, population aging is unquestionably the most important demographic force of this first half of the 21st century. And I think the second half of the 21st century is going to be the climate change. And one of the things we will have to think about is how these forces collide. Before I get into some of the more nitty-gritty details, I thought I'd give you a bit of a perspective. How did we get here? And this is a historical perspective on increase in life expectancy. And this chart goes from 1800s to 2050, which it is projected. And you can see that there are certain inflections where we started to see where the life expectancy started to go up. And I think one of the biggest things that happened that gave a big push to life expectancy is clean water, good food, and better environment. That's where the introduction of public health came to the world. And after that, somewhere in 1920s or 1928, there was a discovery of penicillin, because most of the deaths that we used to have in early years were due to infectious diseases. So penicillin actually changed the trajectory of aging and what we see now. And after that, there are lots of other innovations that have happened in medicine, public health, and social policy that has given a rise to the life expectancies that we see. And I think Minister is absolutely right. It is actually a triumph of modern medicine, public health, and humanity that we are living this long. It actually is an opportunity more than a challenge, and we'll talk more about that a little bit later. The question that lies in front of us is that what happens now after this phase 2 that I called earlier on? What happens in phase 3? Are we going to continue to get older? Are we going to plateau? Or somehow we are going to go down in life expectancy? Because there are many different forces that are at play here, and that is that modern medicine, science, innovation is going to give us lots of tools to grow old and grow old in healthy fashion. But there are certain behaviors that as human beings we take on, such as poor lifestyle and obesity. Is that going to impact where we end up going when it comes to life expectancy? And those are the questions in front of many of us who do research in this area that we tackle. And this is what Canada looks like. In 1990s, if we look at the distribution of population in Canada, it actually looked like a pyramid. Let it go to 2015, it's no longer a pyramid, it's an upside down pyramid. And the two fastest growing segments of the population are the baby boomers, that is coming between 55 to 65 right now. And then there is a big push that people are living longer into their 80s and even into 100. So these are two very different types of populations that have very different needs and expectations that we all as a society will have to work together to provide. And this has already been mentioned, and I will just skip through this quickly. There are more seniors now than there are children under the age of 15. And so when I think about this issue, I don't think just of the aged. It is an intergenerational issue. As a society, we have to think about how it impacts all of us in a positive way, and there are challenges with it too. And what I wanted to talk, that there is a bit of a negative perception, what do we think of older people? We think as people become older, they are actually, people perceive them, they are declining, they have problems, they have issues, they become disabled, they are dependent on the society, on the healthcare system. Actually, truth is slightly different. Many people are very, very functional. Not all older people are equal. And I think this is what we want to keep in mind. There is no typical older person. Everyone has its own trajectory, and that is the trajectory that we want to focus and maintain. I'll use this as an example, and if you look at the first part of the life, early life, you see that yellow line there. Basically, when you look at younger people, they don't look that different. Their trajectories are pretty much similar. They're all trying to have developmental gains. But as we start to get older and get into our middle age, we start to differentiate. There are people, some, who will actually have difficult time. They will decline in their function, and they will experience disabilities. And partly not what their abilities are, the mobility impairments they have, part of it is also a function of what the environment looks like, what our communities look like, what our neighborhoods look like. And then there are people who are somewhere in between. They're hanging around the cusp of going below that disability threshold. And for us, the question is, how do we keep them above that? That's where a lot of the research that we are doing here at McMaster is focused on keeping people above that disability threshold and functional and mobile in their communities. And that requires looking at social structures, our housing, our transportation, and everything that comes with it. So I will give you a quick snapshot of what is happening here at McMaster. And this is just one slide. I won't go through a whole bunch of them. We are doing some wonderful research here to see how physical activity and exercise actually can improve the functional abilities of older people. And there's some wonderful evidence coming out and strategies that we are working on. Good diet, nutrition, balanced diet. More and more, I think in the next couple of weeks, you will hear that American Association of Cardiology actually going to say, please eat more butter. It's not bad for you, it's good for you. So diet is an important issue. Proper housing, modern housing, smart technologies, transportation structures. We have some colleagues here in the room who are working on looking at how do you keep older people mobile once they lose their license, because social isolation is deadly. And social isolation can lead to depression and all sorts of problems. So we want to make sure that our older people are engaged. And biological research, clinical research, and environmental type of research. This is the gamut of research that we are engaged here. And I think, as it was mentioned earlier on, that if you talk to older people, health issue is only one part of the story. They are actually looking for many other things that actually allow them to stay healthy and functional around their communities. In fact, older people have a lot of good suggestions to give. We just have to get better at listening to those suggestions, and that will make our societies better. If actually we create healthy years for older people, we are going to increase the quality of life of all populations. And I think that's the take-home message from what's happening nowadays in the area of research and policy innovation. And I think people are looking for dignity, respect, safety, security, good built environments. So there are sidewalks that people can walk through without worrying about that somebody is going to trip them over. If you think about Hamilton, we have King Street. There are 3 lanes, and there's a light switch, the red light. Actually, you really need to basically jog to get across. If you think about an older person, how do we change those environments to ensure that people are able to move around and engage in the society? And I call this picture a rose, and I think that's what it is. Aging of the population is like a flower. We just have to take advantage of it, and they have lots to give back to the society. They do volunteerism, they are consumers, they generate economy, and that's what we have to focus. So my last slide is future age it will be us. And I think, what is our vision of the age itself? And that's a question in front of all of us. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Margaret Denton, and I'm proud to be a baby boomer. At least I was proud to be a baby boomer until suddenly I became a part of a so-called tidal wave of boomers who are set to crash the Social Security and the healthcare system. This argument is made despite the fact that people are living longer and they're healthier and they're more active, and further, with economists who argue that with careful planning, we will be able to meet the needs of our aging population. Now, in terms of planning, we've been planning for the baby boom generation since the early 50s, building schools, building hospitals, building community services and various other infrastructures. What makes us think that we cannot continue to plan for the future? Now, Parminder has impressed upon us about the importance of mobility for being both physically and socially active. And as an older adult, I think I have an important part to play in staying healthy and active and socially engaged. But what older adults can do to foster their own health and well-being is only part of the picture. We live in a country and in a community that enables us to continue. We need to live in a country and in a community that enables us to continue to be active and contributing members of our society. Planning for an aging society should be a partnership between older adults and their community. As I began to wind down my academic career as a professor of gerontology at McMaster, I felt deeply that there was a need for an organization to advocate and educate for the well-being of older adults in Hamilton. So along with a number of colleagues, we formed the Hamilton Council on Aging in 2007, the fourth such council in Ontario. So about that same time, the World Health Organization began an initiative to make cities and communities age-friendly. And this initiative has expanded all over the world with thousands of communities working on plans to make their communities age-friendly. So what is an age-friendly community? Well, it's one which establishes policies, programs, services, and infrastructure that supports the physical and the social environment to enable older adults to live in safety, enjoyment, good health, and well-being, and to be able to contribute to society in meaningful ways. And I have to point out that an age-friendly community is age-friendly to all ages, not just to older adults. So I was very excited about this initiative, and I brought this idea to the Hamilton Council on Aging in 2007, and it became part of our strategic plan. So with input from older adults, and partnerships with many organizations in the city, including the City of Hamilton and the Seniors Advisory Council, we developed Hamilton's Plan for an Age-Friendly City, which was accepted by our council in 2014. So Hamilton's Plan for an Age-Friendly City has a vision. It has 7 strategic goals. It has 25 objectives and 101 recommendations. So most of the goals relate to fostering an accessible physical environment and an inclusive social environment. And I'd like to tell you about some of the activities that we're doing in Hamilton to make us age-friendly. So in terms of transportation, so we want transportation. The goal is to make transportation safe and easy for older adults to get around. Well, the city has fully accessible buses with drop-down floors, and of course we have transportation for people with disabilities as well, DARTs. So, but what many people who are growing older drive around in cars all the time. They haven't got any idea about how to take a bus. So what the Hamilton Council on Aging is doing is we have developed a workshop. We've offered 25 workshops that teach older adults how to take the bus, how to get on and off, how to wayfind, etc. A second A second area is around outdoor spaces. We think they should be accessible, safe, and inviting. So in fact, older adults have a higher risk of pedestrian collisions with motor vehicles than their younger counterparts. So in the response, the city is installing pedestrian crossovers and signalized intersections with accessible pedestrian signs. So there are now 16 such crossings and 29 more are planned. So what the Senior Advisory Committee is doing is they're offering 10 workshops this fall around pedestrian safety, including how to use these special crosswalks. Hamilton has many trails for walking and biking. So the Hamilton Council on Aging has created a brochure or booklet called Let's Take a Walk, a guide to age-friendly trails in Hamilton, where we showcase 18 of these trails and rank them in terms of their level of ability. And then we offer a workshop and take people for a walk. So housing, there are over 600 seniors on the waiting list for social housing. So the City of Hamilton has committed over $50 million to build and repair social housing, along with some money that the province is contributing, and in an attempt to bring down the wait list. The Seniors Advisory Committee has developed a housing guide to describe the various housing options available to older adults and a checklist to help older adults figure out which housing choices are good for them. In terms of recreation and leisure, there are approximately 3,000 older adults in Hamilton who actually use the senior centers, and the city has developed a new 55 program guide that describes all of the programs offered in these centers across the city. And as well, we have a new city senior center in Flamborough, and we're also opening up seniors clubs across the city with various activities. In terms of community information, lack of information and access to information was a big theme when we did our community consultations. So in response to this, the City of Hamilton has redesigned their seniors webpage, and the community is getting information out about the Red Book and 211. One is where you can phone or go on the internet to get access about all the services and activities, etc., that are available out there. And finally, social isolation and loneliness are big problems that older adults face. There's about 15%, the estimate is about 15% of people who are socially isolated in the community. 7 organizations in our community have received a large grant from the New Horizons and to reduce social isolation over a 3-year period, working with connectors. Connectors link older adults to community services or to recreational activities. And in the 3-year period of this funding, we hope to reach about 2,000 socially isolated adults. So my takeaway message is that, just building on the saying that it takes a community to raise a child, I might add that it also takes a community to enable the social and physical participation of our aging population. Thank you very much.
Firstly, I'd just like to honor the ancestors, caretakers of this land, the Indigenous peoples. My sacred name is Bald Eagle Woman Who Leads. My Christian name is Doreen Spence. I will speak to the topic of aging and elders by sharing my personal story with you. I was blessed to be raised by my grandparents of the Cree Nation, who exemplified strong values and made an extra effort to pass on the teachings to ensure the culture would be available to future generations. They did this through oral traditions. I recall Dad had a certain whistle, which told me it was time to play hide and seek. I would hide immediately. It was not until I was a parent myself that I discovered that, in fact, it was not a game. And they were protecting me from the Indian agents or the RCMP who were scooping children and taking them off to residential schools. That was their way of protecting me. I am grateful to them for this amazing insight and awareness. I cannot imagine how difficult it was for my grandparents, who were left with no children within the communities. Their vital role in our communities were left abandoned with no one to mentor and teach. The intergenerational impacts that the legacy of the residential schools have had on our elders and our community members today is why the road to reconciliation is so important. The gratefulness and the blessings that I have because I did not go to residential school are indescribable. They spared me the trauma and the suffering that many of our current elders have had to deal with. There are many who suffer from PTSD, from various traumas such as sexual, physical, mental, and spiritual, emotional abuse. Not everyone is fortunate enough to know their language, their songs, their creation stories. I do not take this knowledge for granted. The role of healthy elders in our lives and our culture is imperative, and the essence of who we are as Indigenous peoples. The wisdom, knowledge of nature, the natural laws, the multiple roles that they play in our community cannot be understated. They are mentors, educators, healers, ceremonialists, storytellers, and above all, they impart great wisdom. In our traditional ways, the respect for these knowledge keepers as they age means that they become like our children. We honor them and we baby them. We take care of them. We do not neglect or abuse them. I always ensure that I'm a balanced human being, emotionally, physically, spiritually, mentally, before I can help anyone else. The healing begins with me. This has allowed me no other option than to carry on our culture and our stories. I knew that from when I was a very young child. My role as a healer in both the traditional and Western sense is not so different. It is no surprise that I chose nursing as a career. It complements the traditional practices in some ways. Trust me, it was not easy, though. I wanted to break every myth and stereotype and prove everyone wrong, and I was persistent. I would always exemplify the sacred teachings. I knew why I was here upon the planet, and I brought this with me when I worked as a nurse. My great-grandparents were such an amazing influence on me, as they would teach me traditional healings, about medicines, and about the natural ways, which I still practice today. These are connected to our sacred ways. I have a vision for a society that embraces elders and traditional knowledge. Leading your life as an example for our young people to build up our elders in the making. I have experienced that people are becoming more mindful, conscious, and aware. This provides an opening for us to have compassion and understanding of other peoples. I see people in my community that have a certain balance in their lives, especially the women, who are both university educated and understand their traditional ways. This is the driving force for future generations, lived experience and learned experience. You have to be your authentic self. That is the key to it all. I have worked on indigenizing programs at post-secondary institutions, and those make an impact on others, and it spreads. I'm very pleased of the work that I have done with the Faculty of Nursing at Mount Royal University. We had a field school experience in Hawaii, and their elder and I were able to promote a new experience for them. We shared ceremonies with them that allowed them to grow as human beings, to let go of their issues and work on being balanced. This is transformative change. Another amazing outcome of this experience for those nurses is the realization that globally, Indigenous peoples have shared teachings that connect us to Mother Earth. At 80 years of age, today I host vision quests, sweat lodges, and other sacred ceremonies in support of building healthier communities and leaving a legacy for others. This is something that my grandparents taught me. What impact do you leave upon the earth? Hai hai, naskum.
Hi, I'm Mike Kirby, and what I'd like to do is talk to you tonight about mental illness and mobility. My introduction to mental illness began when my older sister, who was then in her mid-20s, started to suffer from depression. The family knew she was down, although none of us knew why. Because of the stigma attached to my sister's mental illness, my family never sought treatment. Consequently, her depression got worse and worse. She became anorexic and then attempted suicide. Thankfully, the suicide did not succeed. That's the bad part of my sister's story. The good part is that after the suicide attempt, she went for treatment. And she got better with the help of pharmaceutical drugs, a psychiatrist, and most importantly, a person my sister called her spiritual advisor. Not spiritual in the religious sense, but spiritual in the sense that Indigenous people all over the world use the term, meaning treating the mind and body holistically. My sister then went on to university, got an undergraduate degree and a master's degree. I tell you this story so that you will know that people who get a mental illness can, in fact, lead a reasonable life in spite of the chronic nature of their illness. Mental illness affects an individual's mobility in three quite distinct ways. First, mental illness impacts their personal development mobility and makes it much more difficult for a person with a mental illness to develop their intellectual skills and their interpersonal skills. Second, mental illness very severely impacts a person's social mobility. The stigma attached to mental illness impacts a great many people who do not want to have a relationship and indeed, frankly, are afraid to have a relationship with someone with a mental illness. This in turn leads to social isolation and very little social action or social mobility. Third, mental illness almost always impacts a person's employment mobility. Even if mental illness does not affect the person's ability to do the job for which they've applied, they are frequently turned down because an employer does not want to take on what they perceive to be the risk of employing someone with a mental illness. These three impacts on mobility stay with an individual from the onset of their mental illness through their senior years, unless the illness is properly treated when it first arises. Now, when we think about mental illness in seniors, we usually think about dementia in all its related forms, including Alzheimer's disease. The social mobility impact of dementia is particularly acute. The social isolation often results in the patient's illness getting worse. The lack of social mobility accelerates the decline in the patient's physical and mental health. But dementia-related illnesses are not the only mental illnesses which impact seniors. There are many seniors who have had a mental illness for decades. which, particularly in the case of mood disorders such as anxiety and depression, began when they were children, but like my sister, were not treated until the illness became very severe and acute. This lack of treatment is partly to do with stigma. And while considerable progress has been made in the last 11 years since the Senate report started the current debate on mental illness, out of the shadows at last, we still have a very, very, very long way to go before we have truly been successful in attacking the stigma of mental illness. But the lack of treatment is also caused by the structure of Canada's healthcare system. When Medicare began in 1967, the only healthcare costs which were going to be covered by public health insurance, or Medicare, were services provided in a hospital or in a doctor's office. That restriction, with very few exceptions, continues today. Consequently, the cost of psychotherapy, which is provided by a registered therapist, such as a social worker or a psychologist, that cost is not covered by Medicare. This makes psychotherapy beyond the financial means of many, many, many Canadians, indeed most Canadians, as psychotherapy services would have to be paid for out of pocket. Psychotherapy is the ultimate example of two-tier healthcare in Canada. And nowhere in the healthcare system is this more of an acute problem than in children and youth mental health. About 50% of adults with a mental illness, 50% of adults with a mental illness had the onset of that mental illness when they were under the age of 14. 70% of adults with a mental illness had the onset of that mental illness when they were under the age of 17. Mental illness starts as a young person's illness. But because of stigma and financial cost, only 20% of children and youth with a mental illness get treatment. I simply ask you to reflect on the reaction in the country if 20% of children and youth with cancer got treatment. The illness, as a result, stays with these children into adulthood and becomes their lifetime companion from childhood through adulthood and into their senior years. This lack of treatment is completely and utterly unnecessary. As more than 80% of youth with a mental illness, the initial mental illness they have is a so-called mood disorder. It's either anxiety or depression. These are illnesses which can be successfully treated by psychotherapy. It is frankly totally and completely inexcusable that public insurance does not cover this service for our young people, but rather condemns them to a life of having mental illness until they ultimately pass away. Canada's young people deserve to have the barriers of social mobility, personal development mobility, and employment mobility removed. But unless this policy gets changed, Canada will continue to have seniors who needlessly suffered all of their life simply because their illness, their mental illness, was not treated when they were young people. Clearly, it is high time that federal and provincial policymakers accepted the fact, as Canada's Indigenous inhabitants did centuries ago, that no one is truly healthy unless they are also mentally healthy. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Dee Mangan from McMaster University, and we need to talk about drugs. This is not the drug problem that you've been reading about in the media, but it is an equally big drug problem, that probably represents the biggest opportunity to improve medical care in older age in the next 30 years in Canada. Meet Anne. Anne's 85, and she's had a fall at home, and you can see her medications on the right-hand side of the screen. This scenario will be very familiar to you. If you're over 65 in Canada and on one medication, you're likely on 7. So you, or your mother, or your father has multiple pills to take at multiple times of the day. And a blister pack might be used to try and reduce the confusion and keep things on track. So where's the problem in this? If you need the pills, surely you need the pills. Well, it's a little bit like music. If we listen to a little bark, some Miles Davis.
Come over to the window, my...
The very Canadian. The Four Tops, or maybe. Some Bruce Springsteen. On their own, they sound wonderful, and they do us good. They make us feel better. But what happens if we play them all together?
Come over to the window, my little darling.
Played together, they become a cacophony. And this is what taking multiple medicines is like for patients as they get older. How does this happen? It's because our system of care has been developed to look at single diseases in isolation. And this has been very successful in enabling us to live a healthy old age. But if we take a 70-year-old woman and give her the 5 conditions that an average 70-year-old woman might have, and it doesn't matter which ones you choose, and we take the guidelines for each of these single diseases and apply them, this is what happens. The most important part of this is not just the cacophony, but the 16 different possibilities for interactions between drugs and other drugs, or drugs and other diseases. So you can see that what looks like good care, if you look at this person as a collection of their single diseases, is actually meaningfully worse care for this individual. This is compounded by the fact that as we age, we're much more vulnerable to the side effects of drugs, and the benefits often diminish or even disappear. We now know that more people get admitted to hospital from low blood sugar, from the drugs used to treat diabetes, than from high blood sugar. And if you're on an agent for blood pressure, you're much more likely than your neighbour who's not to be admitted with a serious injury from a fall. Like tidying up music into its component parts. This is what happens when we tidy up patients into their component diseases or drugs. We lose the meaning and context that makes it impossible to hear the melodies of the person's life and understand the effect of the illnesses and the drugs. And it's a big problem. In Canada, 1 in 10 people on 5 or more medicines have a drug side effect that leads them to need medical care. More people die of adverse drug effects in Europe each year alone than die of prostate cancer or colon cancer or breast cancer. Yet we screen for these things. It's the equivalent of 2 jumbo jets full of people crashing every day and killing everybody on board. If this was an airline, would you fly in it? But patients do every day. But this cause of death and illness that's so common is largely lost in our focus on single diseases. We know that polypharmacy has a huge effect. Polypharmacy means taking 5 or more medicines. And this has a huge effect on mobility. You can see here that it increases your risk of falls, it interferes with balance and strength, it gives thinking and memory problems, sleep and fatigue. So somebody said it makes you dizzier, drowsier, and dulls your thinking. And these things you can see have a huge impact on our mobility in our homes and also our ability to be mobile in the community. You can see that it really increases the risk of that dreaded social isolation. We know that people on particular medicines have increased risk of car accidents. We know it interferes with driving when you're on multiple medicines. And we went and we asked patients about what were the barriers to addressing this issue. And patients said, well, we'd like to take less medication. We think you doctors prescribe too much medication. And we think stopping pills now and then is a good idea, a drug holiday. But we're a bit nervous about raising it in the conversation because we worry about what you'll think if we do. And we worry that if we trial stopping, we won't be allowed to restart. And then we went to doctors and we asked them what were the barriers. And they said, well, we worry about giving the wrong impression by starting this conversation. And we worry about not following the single disease guidelines. And we worry particularly because we don't have a system or guidelines to support this. So, this is our vision of our research project here at McMaster, TAPER, a team approach to polypharmacy reduction. And our dream is that this is part of routine care for older adults, just like flu shots or pap smears in younger adults. We've created a program that first of all centres around the patient, not the diseases. The first thing we do is say, what matters to you? What are the symptoms that are important to you? And what are the things that you'd like to do that your health stops you from doing? And do you think you're having any problems with your drugs? And then we've created an evidence-based computer software program that looks across all the diseases, just like our 70-year-old, and flags the problems that might be an issue for you as an individual. And we put this together to prioritise a plan for your drug holiday, for pausing some of these drugs, observing what happens, and for monitoring and following up. And we're really excited about what we've seen so far. We've seen people who have been so confused that they needed family members to consent to treatment, transformed within weeks to be able to give their own consent. We've seen people who have been falling and dizzy have that vanish within 2 weeks of starting their taper. So we're excited, and we hope that you can see what we're excited about. Thanks to the Walrus for allowing these 7 minutes for you to glimpse what we think is not a problem, but a huge opportunity to transform medical care, to achieve really what the goal of medical care is, to support Canadians to live their best life, a life worth living on our own terms. Thank you.
You're going too far. You need a chair? Put it up there. No, it's going to fall. Good evening. My name is Stephen Trumper. With me is my awesome daughter, Hannah. For the past 4 years, I've written the back page column in Abilities magazine. I titled it Lost and Found because too often stories of disability and aging focus far too much on loss. But from my perspective, as a lifelong disabled person and a longtime magazine editor and teacher, what is far more compelling, engaging, and utterly human is what follows loss. What do we discover about life? What do we find in ourselves? In each column, I grapple with these questions, and tonight, sticking to the theme of mobility, I would like to read you one of my recent columns. I called it The Walk of Life and gave it the following subtitle: Figuring Out Stuff I Have Discovered is One of the Joys of Disability. The doctor was ready with her prescription. She had been worried about my gait. She had asked me to do what I call the rehab catwalk, a promenade I had done dozens of times in sight of other doctors, each one staring intently as I limp lurched before them. I did these walkabouts, clad only in my underwear, the better to examine how I moved hips, legs, feet. The received wisdom on this day, I should wear a 3-inch lift on my right shoe. This would mean, the doctor explained, that I could better swing my left leg and foot through to a full stride. The complication, I would have to ditch my comfy sneakers and replace them with heavy leather boots. Only they, apparently, could prevent teetering and give me the necessary stability. I was not convinced. The next day I was on the phone. I knew track athletes wore custom-made sneakers. Who customized them? After a few more phone calls, I was in touch with one of these higher tech cobblers, and within a few weeks, I had them. Bright white Nikes, one majestically elevated. It had been a long time since I felt so fleet of foot. The shoes were lightweight, modern, still sturdy, but far removed from the ponderous boots they used to anchor metal leg braces during the height of the polio epidemic. These new sneakers were marvelous. I felt like dancing. I could do the swoosh. This little story of uplift highlights a few fundamentals about living with disability. There always seem to be moments when you're in your underwear being judged. There always seems to be time when you feel more than just a little violated, your personal privacy and dignity casually discarded. And there always seem to be well-meaning suggestions that fall short of how you want to live your life. There is a process to living with disability. Somehow, you learn your best way to absorb, most days, all the frustrations, disappointments, and discrimination that make your life more difficult than it needs to be. What does help a great deal, as my father would often say, is to use your noggin. Figuring out stuff I've discovered is one of the joys of disability. My father made his living as an advertising writer. My mother was a teacher. Both had a strong interest in the arts. So I was raised in a house built on creativity and ingenuity. Though I've had many moments of pure pleasure in figuring out stuff in my various workplaces, nothing has ever thrilled me more than figuring out disability stuff. I'm equally thrilled when people close to me join the effort. I remember my father when I was 9 and obsessed with playing crazy 8s. He wanted to figure out a better way for a kid with the use of only one arm and hand to hold and play the cards instead of just a messy pile in front of him that he has to continually curl up and peek at. The solution came to him when we were visiting my great Aunt Mary. She was in mid-shuffle when my father said, "I have an idea." And he went out to my great Uncle Frank's workshop. About a half hour later, Dad was back, beaming. He'd taken a piece of quarter-round wood trim and with the help of 2 small screws, fashioned a straight, flat length of wood across it, creating a holder for my cards and freeing up my arm and hand to play havoc with great Aunt Mary's gamesmanship. There is a straight line from that makeshift card holder to my swooshing sneakers. Each little burst of inspiration before, in between, and after have enriched my life by making things easier and making me feel that I can hurdle over most obstacles in my path. Using that noggin has helped me adjust to every stage of decline in my disability, and there have been a few. Now there's a new adjustment, not with my spinal cord, but with my beloved Judy, my wife of 35 years. More than 3 years ago, she was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's. Phenomenally assisted by daughter Hannah, I have taken on a major caregiving role. Judy, once my prime caregiver, is now in need of physical help, which I cannot possibly provide. But our daughter can, as can VSWs, as well as friends and family. We are finding our way, slowly, surely, through tears and laughter, as we get used to ever-changing conditions, thinking through each step along the way, finding our new stride. Thank you. Good.
Wow, good evening. I have to say before I get started that typically when I was racing and competing around the world, I'd get inspired by watching other races before mine. So I was the guy sitting down like on the grass watching other races because I'd always find it like inspiring. I'd get on the water and race my best if I watched somebody else race their best. And this has been incredibly intimidating to sit and listen and be inspired by you people. And I'm far more nervous now than I would have been if I went first. So thank you for your incredible insights. We're all, smarter and more fulfilled having listened to them so far. My name is Adam Van Couverden. I come from Oakville, and I'm a McMaster grad. I kayaked for Canada for about 20 years. You're probably asking yourself the same question I asked myself when I was asked to do this, was why? I've never faced any mobility issues, any accessibility issues. And although I am aging at the same rate as you people and a lot of our speakers, I'm on the lower end of that spectrum. But I will remind everybody that we're aging, unless you travel to work every day at the speed of light or close to it, then we're all aging at the exact same rate, which is 1 day per 1 day lived. But I haven't dealt with any of these issues yet. So when I considered what I could add to this conference tonight, I thought about sport. It's the only thing that I'm truly not really an expert on, but close to. I'm not an expert on any of the sciences that we learned about today, but I have traveled the world paddling my boat and being an athlete for the better part of 2 decades, and I have some insight to share on what I think I received from the world of sport and what I think society can serve to receive from the world of sport as well. So before I go on, I'd like to acknowledge not only that we're on traditional territories of the Mississauga and the Haudenosaunee, but also that I was able to make a name for myself here and abroad as a kayaker with an invention from the Inuit people, the Alu people, and other peoples of the north, which is a boat that was used for transportation, for fishing, for exploration. And it was appropriated by us, white people, to race around the world. And I'm very thankful for that creation and for the boat. It was a lot of fun. I never caught a seal or really explored very much, but I used it to the best of my abilities, and I hope I brought the boat a little bit of honor for the folks that invented it over 4,500 years ago. And I certainly wouldn't be standing here in front of you today if it wasn't for the indigenous people that invented that boat. I was able to travel up to Labrador this summer, and for the first time ever, I paddled in a sealskin kayak, and I experienced kayaking with all of my senses. I smelled the boat, I felt the boat, I listened to the boat go through the water, and it was the most incredible experience that I've had as a kayaker, and that was after quitting after 2 decades. So it is not lost on me how fortunate I am to have been a kayaker in this country. But despite that, access to quality sport and play programming, access to great coaching, access to facilities for youth and other people is down in this country. And it's down compared to a lot of countries that we like to consider our equals. It may seem as though I've construed a little bit the theme of this evening by talking about access to sport, but if you'll allow me 4.5 more minutes, then I'll try to loop it back and talk about how sport actually directly relates itself to aging. Access to sport is not just about your age, whether you're a youth or an elder. It's also about your access as a human being and whether or not it's open to you. I like to volunteer with the Special Olympics of Canada. I'm inspired by the Paralympics. We just watched the Invictus Games. And there's other organizations that promote access to sport in different forms for people that face barriers. This summer, I was also working as a community sport ambassador with MLSE's Launchpad Foundation, which seeks to overcome socioeconomic barriers to sport participation. I grew up in community housing in Oakville, Ontario, and I faced some barriers as a youth. Thankfully, my mom stuck me in sport programming, and one of the other things that sport does beyond keep you healthy, it also prevents crime. And if you want any further insight on that, my mom's about 7 rows back there, and she can tell you all about why I got involved in sport at that age. We all know that sport is a precursor and a prerequisite to holistic development, but if you don't receive the knowledge and physical education, if you don't develop a familiarity and a love for sport, and if you don't develop the physical literacy around health and wellness and sport and fitness activities when you're young, then it's unlikely that you're going to utilize any of those skills as you age. It's also a relatively cheap and non-invasive form of medicine. My father has Parkinson's disease, and he's been diagnosed for about 5 years. And the number one thing that he can do, according to his doctor, beyond take his drugs every day, is be physically fit. So for the past 5 years, my dad has been boxing. He's been going to 3 classes a week. He's been doing all sorts of activity. He's lost 30 or 40 pounds, and he's healthier than he's been, despite the fact that he now has Parkinson's disease and he's aging at the same rate as you and I. And it's because he's physically active and physically fit. He's got 2 golden retrievers that need at least 2 hours of walking every day, and he gets outside. And sport and activity has definitely improved his life, and he's actually one of, I think, 2 patients of Dr. Anthony at Toronto Western Hospital that have actually seen their symptoms regress. So my dad may be curing Parkinson's disease, knock on wood. I'm Dutch, I have a wooden noggin, so I can knock up there. I don't think he's curing it, but he's definitely slowing it down, which is great. And if you can slow down aging with a little bit of sport and activity, then that's something. I think it speaks volumes to the potential. Now, as I said, I'm a McMaster grad. There's a couple of my professors in the audience, and that means that I'm intrinsically inclined to believe that sport and play is the solution for all the world's woes and problems. That may not be the case, but I know that it'll solve a few of them. For me, I'm currently going through a little bit of a transition, and I'm learning the difference between training and exercise. I'm trying to learn how to exercise. I've never really exercised before in my life. I used to get up in the morning and get on the water for 90 minutes, then hit the gym for 2 hours, then go for a run, then get back on the water for 90 minutes. Now when I look back on that, I think I'm insane, or I was insane. What was wrong with me? The fact is, nothing was wrong with me. I was focused on something that took that amount of work, and it probably wasn't even that healthy, to be honest. I dealt with a lot of injuries, little injuries, nothing serious, but they didn't prevent me from competition, which I'm thankful for. But now that I'm sort of changing gears and entering society as a regular human, I don't want to exercise for 25 hours a week or train for 25 hours a week. I'd like to exercise for maybe 3 or 4 or 5 hours a week. And that's been a little bit of a challenge. And I'm realizing that our physical education system, despite being fully engaged in it, and Stu and Maureen, this is no reflection on your capacity as a professor, may have failed some people growing up, that we didn't necessarily develop the ability to exercise and to use our bodies in a way that is medicinal. And I think we could learn a lot from Indigenous peoples and First Nations and the Inuit and other people that work outdoors, like farmers, like my grandparents, who probably lived a little bit longer because they're outside every single day. My grandmother fell twice this spring, and she broke both of her hips, and she's been doing physio for the first time in her life. She's exercising, and she tells me about her exercise routine when I visit, and she's enjoying them. It's a challenge. She's 92 years old, so it's unlikely that she's going to get way stronger, but she can walk to the bathroom without having to hold onto a handrail. And she's realizing that exercise is pretty cool. One of the pillars of Canada 150 this year was diversity and inclusion, and ensuring that sport and access to sport is for absolutely everybody, whether you want to go to the Olympics or you want to age gracefully, you want to prevent disease and illness. It's absolutely a free opportunity for everybody. And if we can go back a few years and look at our physical education system and look at how we teach sport, so that as adults we don't have to search for something online or on Instagram or go to a yoga class and spend $35 when it's right in front of us. You can put on your running shoes, you can go outside, you can enjoy sport and play, and I think we'll all be better off and healthier for it. including me, a retired Olympian who needs to learn how to exercise for the first time in his life. Truly inspiring evening. Thank you very, very much for everybody's attention and my fellow speakers.
So when my son played hockey, I was known as high five guy with all the little kids. Look, it's a pleasure to be here in Hamilton. I haven't had the pleasure to come out to McMaster University yet, although I spent a fair bit of time talking with researchers at many universities in Ontario, looking at all kinds of issues related to the future, from climate change to the rise of mental health burdens among Canadians, to artificial intelligence and machine learning and digital culture, to the economic changes we're seeing in terms of rising economic precariousness. And all these things are factors that play into our future. So I've called this presentation From A to B, Mobility's Existential Crisis, because one of the challenges we face is that although we're improving a lot of things in technology, we're not realizing that certain foundations underneath everything we're building are actually crumbling a bit. So we have big plans. We have big plans for infrastructure, for example, and the infrastructure of the future is really about the promise of scaling the ability of people to be more mobile as they go through the different stages of life. So in this province, there's a $190 billion infrastructure plan. And over 12 years, that'll be about $16 billion a year spent on infrastructure, according to the plan. And presumably, with that infrastructure, you can do all the things we want to do. You can have solutions that support aging and mobility, autonomous vehicles, autonomous buses, accessible commuting, being more, and it's one of the big things that's happened in Ontario, is that the GO trains are now more accessible, at least on some routes and on some trains. And of course, better urban design that makes it possible for all kinds of people of all kinds of different ages to move around environments more successfully and capably. And one of the most colorful picture that you're seeing there is the new Lego house that was just launched by Bjarke Ingels Group, the famous Danish architectural firm. And it has all kinds of mobility-related enhancements on the inside, but it's for children as well as for adults and those who are thrilled with the idea of play having an impact on their lives. Now, we have this assumption, we're going to spend this $190 billion, but let's think a bit. What if our best laid plans go awry? What if the government faces reduced tax revenues? What if the credit rating of the province is downgraded to the extent that funds have to be diverted from infrastructure to other things? What if there's smart city failures? Smart cities with lots of technology are more complex and create more interdependencies, which creates a greater risk of failure. And then, of course, what about climate change? What might that do to everything from life expectancy? There are questions about how we'll adapt to lives if there are multiple disasters over the next 10, 20, 30 years in terms of whether we're going to have more higher mental health burdens and more traumatized populations as a result of the risks that we face. So all these things could mean that there's going to be less of this, what we want to see, and a bit more of this. So these are bent railway tracks caused by extreme heat events in the UK, and we know we've had this problem with the GO trains in Ontario. So imagine now you're on the GO train, you have a mobility issue that requires you to have special access to the vehicle, and now your train is stuck. Now how are you going to deal with that question? So there needs to be an interconnection between thinking about how we're going to advance, how we're going to face some of the shocks that we're going to face, and how we're going to take care of people with mobility-related challenges, and how community can be responsive to that. So The idea here is to think more about repairability, ruggedness, and really smart design. So here behind you, you see, well, let's start with the four-wheel drive vehicle. Now, some people think that the future is all about electric cars. Some people think the future is all about vehicles that use less and less gas. Well, that might be true, but it might also be true if there's more damage to roads, if there are other kinds of issues, if we don't build out the electric grid infrastructure enough, that there's a bit of going back to the future. In Africa, for example, the Land Rover is still one of the most prized vehicles because it can be repaired and has been able to be repaired for about 50 years. And so we have to think about those sorts of things as well. How are we going to repair and maintain things? But also, how are we going to advance mobility? So there's an MIT-designed wheelchair there, which is absolutely brilliant. It uses a mechanical advantage to allow people who use wheelchairs to move across all kinds of terrain, assuming they're young enough and strong enough to do that. But it's more that this is an example of how design is being used to create ways for people to get around that aren't as dependent on having smooth infrastructure, but more repairable infrastructure. So that's another thing to think about. And then here, in terms of responsive communities, for me, this is maybe one of the biggest issues. This is the aftermath of Hurricane Matthew in Florida, and the Red Cross recently wrote about how to deal with elderly patients and patients with dementia when they're dealing with natural disasters. And the protocol is to get the elderly patients who are in better mental and physical health into shelters sooner to provide a predictable environment for those with dementia so that they are welcomed into something that has a structure and a pattern. So I would suggest that how we organize as communities to have relationships intergenerationally, which is what our wonderful beginning speaker suggested we do, is going to be very, very important. How we build cohesive communities to respond to maybe some things not turning out the ways we would hope they would is going to be super important. So I'll just leave you with two words, and they are rugged and responsive. And with that, I thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, that's a lot of different ways to think about mobility. That was extraordinary. Thank you to all of our talkers. It's funny when we all talk about being elderly and everyone picks the age 65. If you go to Shoppers Drug Mart, it's 55. Seniors Day is for people 55 and older. If you listen to Moses Neimer in his Zoomer magazine, he says it's 45. You're a Zoomer if you're 45. So, it's happening to all of us. I would like to thank all of our speakers, Parminder Rana, Margaret Denton, Doreen Spence, Mike Kirby, Dee Mangan, Stephen Trumper, Adam Van Couverden, and Sanjay Khanna. Please join me in thanking them all. This is our 81st Walrus Talks, which means there are now over 600 Walrus Talkers. That is also how many 7-minute Walrus Talks videos that you can watch whenever you want, wherever you are, on a zillion different topics on our YouTube channel called Walrus Television. Or you can head to thewalrus.ca. You can subscribe at thewalrus.ca too. I told you I was going to do this. But the way better idea is to subscribe tonight. Catherine and Blair and Tina from the Walrus are out there. Just because you came out tonight, and we love you for doing that, it's $25 for an entire year of the Walrus. Just for you tonight, we practically deliver it ourselves to your door. It does come to your door. Unlike the Globe and Mail, we're still national. We still deliver to Atlantic Canada as well. So do that tonight. While you're there, you can sign up for our newsletter and you won't miss any Walrus talks. Now, I'm going to hold the audience for just a minute, ask our talkers to stand up. I also want to thank Laura Harrington, Rob Baker, Suzanne Labarge, Mira, everyone at McMaster, and the minister for coming tonight. If you guys would also stand up, I'm going to let you go out to the reception first. And so you don't do that weird thing where you trap them. Go ahead. Off you go. Go. Where you trap them in the front row and try to talk to them. Thank you. Are there, I already asked if there were subscribers in the room. Are there any donors in the room? Marnie Pakin, where are you? Are you here? I think you're supposed to be here somewhere. Maybe you didn't actually get here. If you are a donor to the Walrus or a subscriber already, please find me at the reception. I'd like to buy you a drink. That's how much we love you. So everyone is invited to the reception. There is food and there is drink. If you are there, there will be good conversation. Thank you for coming. Good night and safe home.